Are the things that we see on this marginal increase level from IVF itself, or is it from the conditions that created the infertility that led to IVF? Studies that show higher rates of premature birth, low birth weight, placental complications, abnormal cord insertions, higher NICU admissions, and congenital anomalies, including congenital heart defects. That sounds scary because you're like, oh my gosh, but I don't think that the vast majority of the concerns that we see is from just the act of doing IVF. If you are on the infertility journey and you are considering IVF, or you are grappling with this idea, maybe you aren't wanting to do it yet, but it might be a future thing down the line, and you're just not really sure what to do to optimize your body so that maybe you have a better outcome in getting pregnant, in having healthier pregnancies and healthier babies, I have an entire course and support on this inside of Womanhood Wellness, my membership. And if you are still on the naturally trying to conceive journey, I have amazing resources for you too. But I wanted to create an integrative IVF option because I wanted that information when we went through the IVF process. I wanted to do it as healthy as possible. I wanted to optimize my husband and myself as much as possible. So in my course and my support, I break down on what to do to optimize before egg retrieval, how to detox the hormones and all of the things after egg retrieval, and then how to optimize and prepare before you do an embryo transfer. I explain different concepts, things that you're not going to learn in your IVF appointment, and I give you the natural medicine support, actionable, actual protocols on which supplements, what lifestyle things, and then you join this amazing community of women who are on the path toward becoming a mother, where you have support along that process. You're able to ask me questions monthly, and it's just an incredible group of women and amazing resources that you're just not getting anywhere else. So head to womanhoodwellness.com and you can join there and get all of the resources that you need for your infertility journey. Again, that's womanhoodwellness.com. Welcome back to Healthy as a Mother. I am your co-host, Dr. Leah Gordon, and this is the show for becoming and being a mother, where Dr. Morgan and I share the natural women's health and motherhood guidance you've been looking for through a fresh, functional, and balanced lens. And today's episode might be a little bit triggering, but I think it's an important conversation to have, which is a question I Googled personally on our infertility journey, which is, are IVF babies less healthy? I really wanted to understand what the science said and what people were seeing in trends, because I was really scared, honestly, to go down the IVF route. After our 5-year infertility journey, when we finally figured out that having babies on our own naturally was probably going to be impossible based on a genetic and anatomical issue in my husband, I really wanted to know, are my kids going to have issues? Do I need to be aware of things? What is going on? And there are some studies that show certain things, but we have some big questions to break down those data points and talk about what might really be going on. This is a very thought-provoking episode. We talk about philosophical things. We talk about the data, the science. It's just really, really amazing. So if you are on the infertility journey, considering IVF, have already gone through IVF, or if you're just curious to hear what Morgan and I's take is on this topic, it's a great one. Let's get started.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to talk about something that if you are exploring IVF as an option for your family, you've probably wondered yourself, and it is spurred from, you, Dr. Leah, and your own experience and wondering these kinds of things. Are IVF children born through the IVF process less healthy? Do they have any repercussions? Is there anything there? And it may not be from the actual process. It may be from the implications of why it had to be done or whatever. So we're going to go through a lot of, it's just a conversation. Hopefully this is not triggering. This is not meant to shame. Obviously you have 2 children born via IVF. This is not to say that it's wrong to do it or anything like that. We're just saying, hey, and it's something to think about, because sometimes people do jump to conclusions on what is going on and it may not be the full story. So there's obviously, as always, a lot of nuance.
Yes.
We should have been called Healthy as a Nuanced Mother.
We should change our tagline to be Healthy as a Mother, the nuance of, motherhood.
Becoming and being a mother.
Yeah, the nuance of becoming and being a mother, because I feel like that is so much what we talk about. and what people just have a hard time holding space for, which blows my mind because that's what really people want. We don't
Well, it's
want
just the truth. It doesn't even matter if it was what we want. Actually, we probably do want it to be easy and black and white. It just isn't true.
Yeah, totally. We get to be healthy as a mother, the truth, the nuance and the truth. Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
know.
there you go.
But then you have to explain that because people are like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
But anyways, yeah, thank you for introducing that. I just want to start prefacing with, this exact question, are IVF babies less healthy? I Googled, when I was starting this process, it took me a lot of years and a lot of therapy and a lot of processing to even get to the point of accepting that IVF was potentially the route that we were going to have to go during our infertility journey. I had so much fear, so many hesitations. I was just like, if you can't have a baby naturally, or you're not meant to have a baby, we're playing God. What are we doing? This is so medicalized. It was against all the things that I wanted and imagined for my life. And then I had a lot of fears. And, when you Google that, you see a lot of studies that are like higher rates of autism with IVF babies and higher rates of, and you're just like, oh my gosh. And so my doctor mind at the time asked this question of, is it actually IVF? Or is it the circumstances that surround the couples going through the process of IVF that are leading to these outcomes? And at the end of the day, I think we just need to unpack this, and we don't have a crystal ball. We can't know for sure. IVF has been around since the 70s, so there are people who are older now who we can look at and say, how are you doing? But I don't even know how many of those studies are being done, and the process and the practices of IVF have changed a lot since then. So there really aren't a lot of super long term, like how are the children like long into their life doing that were born via IVF. However, there are some things that we can look at. So basically, we're just going to unpack the science. And just for clarity, I have two beautiful, amazing children born via IVF because of severe male factor infertility, that we anatomically would not be able to have children otherwise. And they're so healthy. I mean, above, their rates of all the things on all the charts, like they're doing very, very well. So I'm N of one, but it's possible, But it's important to unpack. So this can be really triggering because infertility is already so hard. There's so much grief. There's financial sacrifice. The last thing you want to hear is, oh, you're going to finally accept the fact that you're going to go through this treatment, pay a ton of money, go through all of this, and now your baby's going to be unhealthy. Like nobody wants to hear that. And so the moral of the story is what the research actually shows is that most IVF children are incredibly healthy, that they're totally fine, and there is no issue. However, there are some studies, if you dive deep and look it up, and we could talk about the pros and cons of studies and what is being done, and that's a conversation for another day, but there are some studies that show that there's absolutely normal growth, normal cognitive development, normal school performance, normal long-term health. There's also studies that show higher rates of premature birth, low birth weight, placental complications, so issues with the placenta, abnormal cord insertions, higher NICU admissions, and congenital anomalies, including congenital heart defects. Congenital means born with. And there's potentially some increased rates of asthma, allergies, eczema, so that kind of triad, and some cardiometabolic differences. Now, that sounds scary because you're like, oh my gosh. But what you have to look at when we look at the research and what any clickbaity, trendy, even a study that you just fall upon if you don't understand rates. We've talked about this on other previous podcasts when we've talked about rates of stuff, like the stillbirth rate doubling, going from like 0.5 to 1 or something,
Yeah, exactly.
Like what I learned about taking statistics in college is basically you can tell any story you want and manipulate the data to say anything you want. And headlines can be the same. You could say stillbirth rates double after, 42 weeks. It's like, okay, that sounds really scary. Going from 1% to 2% is very different than in your mind doubling. So when we say that there's an increased risk, a lot of these studies are finding something between like 20 to 30% increased relative risk. And I just want to paint a picture for you. That means going from like 2% risk to 2.4% risk. So it's not that great, you know?
They're
And
also almost all to do with sort of like the gestation and birth. It's not
yes,
as much like they're the actual baby. I mean, there is that kind of congenital anomaly, congenital heart defect, which may, if in those babies, they may be the ones that are then having a little bit of a harder time, more time in the NICU, et cetera, because of that issue. And it's
yeah.
hard to tease that kind of information out in the data. But it's just interesting that like the vast majority of that list of the kind of like quote unquote negative things has to do with just the gestating of the baby. And once the baby's here, everything's status quo.
Yeah, exactly. And then, well, how is the health, complications? So if you have a preterm baby, maybe they have a different microbiome situation. So then that leads to more eczema, asthma, and is it was
Hmm
the
hmm
IVF or was because you had a preterm baby? And did you have a preterm baby because it was IVF or because you had, some other thing that was going on which required IVF, which gets me into the next point, which is, are the things that we see on this marginal increase level from IVF itself, or is it from the conditions that created the infertility that led to IVF? And I feel like it makes sense when we think about that, but it is a question. Like I had a question of, I feel like my husband is very, very healthy, and we did a bunch of preconception health. And for, 5 years, we were detoxing and doing all these things. I consider myself to be fairly healthy, but we couldn't conceive because what we found out eventually was a genetic issue that led to an anatomical issue where the sperm couldn't get out of his body. And so for us to make an IVF baby with hopefully a healthy man and a healthy woman coming together with two healthy, sperm and egg cells, my assumption would be that that child and baby would be healthy. We needed to get around an anatomical issue. This could be something similar to someone who doesn't have a fallopian tube, or there's some other anatomical blockage. But some people who need IVF are because they have some other conditions like endometriosis, which naturally comes with a lot of inflammation and maybe some microbiome issues. PCOS or PMOS is a common cause for why people go through IVF, even though personally I think there could be a lot done that you don't need IVF, but the conventional model pushes them that way. There can be a lot of autoimmunity going on in the woman or the man, and autoimmune conditions have its own, like, why does someone have autoimmunity? Why do you have Hashimoto's? Why do you have this condition where your immune system's upset? A lot of times it's because there's some deeper root thing going on. Thyroid issues, metabolic dysfunction. So maybe they have prediabetes or diabetes or obesity or some picture that's affecting their fertility. There's a lot more advanced age on the mom side and the dad side. People going through IVF who would maybe have a really hard time conceiving with the mom being 45 and the dad being 55. In nature, that maybe wouldn't happen as prolifically, but it does happen in IVF all the time. And what are the health consequences from having 45-year-old eggs and 55-year-old sperm? These are some things that we're seeing that are more common now because IVF makes them more common that we maybe wouldn't see as often in like the spontaneous pregnancy world. There's male factor stuff, there's DNA fragmentation, there's a lot of sperm issues. Going through the IVF process, when you talk to the clinics, a lot of times if you say, well, my husband has, bad sperm markers, they'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter. We just, pluck them and put them into the egg. And it's like, I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, that's how my children were conceived, but what if that sperm being, having these markers of less optimal health means it comes with some genetic issues or some epigenetic things that could potentially affect the health of the baby. These are some big conversations that we need to have. So personally, I think it's more that than the active IVF is more what are the circumstances surrounding the couple and the situations that require them to go that route anyways.
It's going to be like, how there was that book written, gosh, I always mess this up. Is it the fifth vital sign or the sixth vital sign that's the menstrual cycle?
I mean, different people say different things. That's probably why you're confused. The fifth vital sign is what the book is, but some people call it the sixth because they've like inserted something else to be the fifth.
Something else? Okay. Well, sperm for men is going to be like their fifth or
Oh,
sixth or
yeah.
whatever. Because it's, yeah, if It's like a fluid coming out of you that show if there's something, you've got poor morphology, more motility, whatever, they're not doing so hot. And it, especially if it's in an unexpected person, they're like in their 30s or something, and you're like, wow, this is actually not that great. What can we do? It's such good information
Hmm.
to then deep dive and say, wow, you've got some underlying processes going on. And for freaking sure, it's going to now you've got some certain epigenetic changes going on, whatever. I mean, and not to say that people who conceive naturally don't also have those things
Yeah.
going on. Like they
No,
totally do.
100%. Well, so that leads me to a thing that I have later in my outline, but if you look at the studies that are done on subfertility is kind of a term for just like you're less fertile a little bit. Like the markers that we would look at for fertility are a little bit less than what is ideal. We would call that subfertility, not infertility. Infertility is technically you can't conceive, which I would argue a lot of infertility is technically subfertility. We just haven't addressed you in an
Done
appropriate
anything about it?
way. Not like
Yeah.
infertility. Like my husband has actual infertility. Like the
Yes.
sperm literally cannot get outside of his body on its
Right.
own. Like there is no way for him to just get healthier, have some, radical healing experience, and now all of a sudden he can conceive, where we see that all the time with PCOS, with autoimmune conditions, with metabolic conditions, all of these things, you could conceive on your own if given the right support. They just push people into IVF because they don't do that work. And so if you had gathered data on, I'm going to gather all the data of all the women who've conceived via IVF or naturally who have autoimmunity, you'd
Hmm.
probably see similar patterns, or all of the women who conceive naturally or via IVF who have endometriosis, blah, blah, blah. You would probably see similar patterns in the pregnancy outcomes, in the birth outcomes, and in the child health outcomes, but they don't technically do a lot of those studies. And so it's easy to just do studies on people who do IVF. That's so
They
easy.
really
And then
should
they,
do that. That would be so fascinating. What
I
an interesting
know.
breakdown if they did that. Like, yeah, what about the women who do conceive naturally at 45 or the women
Hmm.
who, well, actually, you know what? That one, that age one may be an inverse relationship because if you're conceiving naturally at 45, there may be something where you have like an extremely healthy,
Yeah, totally.
reproductive system because it shouldn't, quote unquote, like it should be much harder, more difficult for you. And so that one might not work. But I agree with you, like about the endometriosis and the PMOS or whatever it is, like that would be such a good, cool, interesting breakdown.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I think when people just see these blanket things of like IVF babies have more blah, 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 it's like we really have to understand that we're pooling a group of people that are already having a lot of obstacles to their health that might be skewing that data versus it being IVF itself. Now, could there be some impact from the actual IVF process? I think to some degree. For example, the eczema allergies asthma picture is really interesting to me because you and I, being naturopathic doctors, we've mentioned the word epigenetics a little bit. If you're new to our podcast and you don't know what that means, it's basically we have set genes. A gene will tell me if I have brown hair, if I'm tall, if I'm short, all the different things that code for how we are in our body. Epigenetics are how our lifestyle and our environment turns certain genes on or off. So there are set genes and then there are more fluid genes that can be impacted by us. So we can have outcomes in our children. They could have eczema and allergies epigenetically because of something that maybe we as the parents were exposed to before we got pregnant or during our pregnancy, that could be different than somebody who has a different environmental exposure completely separate from their set genes. And in IVF, there's a lot of intervention. In particular, there's different hormones that are given, there's different antibiotics that can affect the microbiome. So it's not very obvious or clear if the actual use of those medications or the antibiotics directly cause issues. But I feel like in theory, there could be some disruption. But I don't think that it's enough in the data that we've seen so far to be like, oh, yeah, because all of these women take these hormones and have antibiotics and all of this stuff, then they're for sure guaranteed a child with these issues. because there's so many other things at play. But I guess there could be a slight part of it. So I'm not saying that IVF, the procedure itself, is completely innocent and it could never cause any issue ever. But I don't think that the vast majority of all of the concerns that we see is from just the act of doing IVF, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. The other thing that I think of is the lack of natural selection in certain situations with
Hmm.
IVF, of the egg being chosen, and then the in ICSI at least, where they're gonna like take the sperm. I just
Hmm.
saw a wild video of a little tiny spirally robot picking up a sperm and shoving it into an egg. Have you seen that?
No.
It's a little nanobot. It's a nanobot. It is this, like half the size of a sperm, and it swims up to, it's like in a petri dish type video. It swims up to a sperm. I'd seen this once like a long time ago, and I didn't think it was real, and I'm seeing it again, and I'm like, I guess if it was back then, otherwise I'd probably just think it was AI, but
Yeah, yeah.
and it picks up a sperm that's not moving at all by the tail, and then it like swims over to the egg and like shoves it inside. It's
Oh
this
my
little like
God.
robot thing. But that aspect of it, now we know there's some research that shows that the egg actually selects for the sperm in some sort of a way.
Hmm.
Maybe there's something there because like
Hmm.
potentially depending on what's going on with his sperm, if it couldn't like if it wasn't there was nothing that was moving to just go and like get the egg itself, there's no way to tell which one would be like the most optimal guy to choose to shove inside of the, you
Yeah,
know. So
totally.
that is something that I think could potentially, but again, it's probably largely going to be on like an epigenetic uh playing field. And I wanted to just give one example of an epigenetic thing just in case anybody's like, what are you talking about? Like for instance, there's been a study to show that mothers who work in like nail tech and hair
Mhm.
type places while pregnant with little girls, those little girls have a higher increased risk of having insufficient glandular tissue in their
Mhm.
breasts to be able to make enough breast milk for their babies. So like once they've grown, so that's not a genetic issue. It's not like that mom who was the nail tech had this IGT, it's called IGT, insufficient glandular tissue, and then pass it on to her daughters. It's something going on with the chemical exposure. It's like environment and food and different things like that interplaying with our DNA to then produce an outcome of the way that like our body is now.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can influence those uh at some points in your life, and sometimes if it affected your puberty and your development if you didn't clean things up, you're not going to be able to do it now at this point because
Mhm.
like the tissue literally just didn't develop. But like with a lot of other epigenetic stuff, the book Dirty Genes by Ben Lynch
Mhm.
is a great one to understand this better. I'll put that in the show notes.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. We've partnered with Needed to bring you this episode. Stress is something that many people can experience along the fertility journey, and it's something that influences how they handle oxidative damage. That's why supporting overall cellular health can be super valuable at any stage along the fertility journey. One product I personally love recommending is Needed's Egg Quality Support. I helped contribute to formulating this product, but even if I hadn't, I would still be confident recommending it because it's so great. It's designed to provide antioxidant and mitochondrial support with ingredients like L-carnitine, green tea extract, ALA, and PQQ. I also love pairing it with Needed's comprehensive prenatal and their CoQ10 for a comprehensive approach. Visit thisisneeded.com and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 20% off your first order. Again, visit thisisneeded.com and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 20%. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Okay, back to the show. Yeah, that's a good idea. And yeah, like you said, it's easier for us to see epigenetic data in pregnancy. Well, actually, that's not true. There's a lot of amazing studies on the health of the man, for example, before pregnancy. So before conception ever happens, and then the outcomes of their kids. And we do see that depending on certain health outcomes and parameters that they're testing in the study in the man before pregnancy, it changes the health of the children, down the road. And it's really easy to study men and fertility just because sperm and it's easier. But like you said, with the egg selection, a woman naturally, when she's going to conceive, the body, we don't know. It could be totally random. If you're kind of a believer that there is no rhyme or reason to the universe, there's no higher power, there's no anything, and it's just like everything is just random blobs of things, you can totally believe that. I don't as much, but you can believe that. I believe that there's more of an intention and an intelligence to the body, and that every group of eggs that a woman has that goes through that maturation process every month in preparation for getting pregnant naturally, there's one dominant egg that gets chosen and gets to be the front runner, the diamond of the season, if you will, of that group of eggs. And that could, if it's an intelligent choice, be the best, healthiest option. And in IVF, we take all of those eggs that would, in natural situations, just resorb and die and, go away, and try to turn them all into future embryos and babies. And so if nature's like, well, we actually didn't think they were quite up to par in IVF, we're like, well, we'll take them all. We're going to give anything that we can. And so there could be some like potential slight epigenetic, mitochondrial, genetic, some variability that nature naturally was trying to get rid of that we use in the IVF space as well. Yeah.
Right. And it's like we're humans, so we're not going to do that. It's like we're just still going to make we're going to have babies. If
Yeah.
if bears had access to IVF and they were having some issues, they would probably do it too.
Yeah,
So because they
totally.
wanted to have families and stuff. So it's like that we are outside of the bounds of nature in that kind of a way. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to fare well for us in some ways. And then in other ways, we're becoming just like so dependent upon it. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the fact that I think about this all the time, the fact that we're born like completely without hair anywhere besides on our heads,
I
like
know.
we would die in a second
I
born
know.
outside in any
I
kind
know.
of element. Like
We're
when
really
over the
not
course of
evolved for this.
adaptation, when did we lose the hair and why? Because
I mean, I
we're
have my
still
own theories on it, which is a whole podcast for another day that'll probably never be shared publicly. But yeah,
Well,
I just think,
I know, I know. Well, that's true. There's like so many different, it depends on your origin story, beliefs, and everything like that. But it's like, yeah, looking around at other species, we are so unequipped to be in this natural world. And that's, and we're not. But anyway, whatever.
yeah, I mean,
We could
I
talk about
think
that
it's
forever.
really bizarre that we're the only species that destroys their own environment, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that are, I think we're bizarre on Earth. I don't think we're
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it's a whole thing. But
I
anyways,
smell what
okay.
you're stepping in, and it rhymes with schmalian.
I wonder what that is. Oh my God, that's so funny. Yeah, there's got to be some explanation because it's like, what in the world are we doing here? We are so unequipped and we're just destroying the entire planet. Like, what is happening? So, anyways, because we can't really conceive on our own anymore, we are in the path of IVF. And you can look at it from a spiritual perspective. You could be like, well, God gave us IVF so that we could continue to reproduce. Some people think it's like the devil. Like, there's so many interpretations of this. And those are the kind of things I grappled with going down this decision. But then ultimately, because of what I understood, and I did so much health improvement for both of us before we did this process, I felt really good about it. And if there's one thing you take away from this podcast, is if you're on the path of infertility, considering IVF, the more that you can optimize your health before doing IVF, the better, because you do improve the egg quality, the sperm quality, the environment of the woman who's going to become pregnant. We can affect the epigenetics, all of that. And if you've already gone through IVF and you're wondering, are my kids going to be okay? Like, there's so much that we can impact and change and support even post exposure to things, And so I just want to give you hope, but this is the kind of conversations that we have to have. And so the next thing that people get really freaked out about is there are a few studies that show slightly higher rates of autism in kids with IVF. And this really wigged me out when I went down this rabbit hole originally because I don't know, I just had this like fear of having a child with autism, even though neurodivergence is so beautiful. There's so many beautiful things about it. It can also be really hard, depending on the circumstance and the situation. And so that was really tricky too. And again, is it because they are conceived via IVF, or is it these other things like paternal age? Like the age of the guy is actually very indicated in autism rates, both in IVF and naturally. So if you have a really, not like old, I hate using the word old, but just advanced age
Advanced.
partner, you
He's an
know?
expert at life because he's been
Yeah.
here for
He's
so
like
long.
got the gray hair, he's earned it. There are just some stats that show that for whatever reason, it could be toxins. It could be he's had 45 years of exposure to toxins versus 25 years. It could be, mitochondrial
Mm,
stuff. It could be inflammation. It could be so many things. But we also see an increased risk of autism in premature babies. And so IVF babies have an increased risk of being premature, but is it just the prematurity, right, that leads to autism?
hmm
In multiples. So IVF can create more twins and more triplets and, underlying infertility, like we've already talked about. A woman might have an autoimmune condition, for example, because she's been exposed to mold and she has yeast or Lyme or some chronic infection. And that's why her body is, quote unquote, attacking itself, which is autoimmunity. In our worldview in naturopathic medicine, a lot of times we're saying, well, something's pissing off your immune system. Your body's not stupid. It didn't just one day start attacking itself. And so, what is that root cause that's leading to that infertility or into that autoimmunity? And we see in the integrative autism world, like our friend Dr. Ari Calhoun, she is such a specialist in this. And when you look at those kiddos with autism, a lot of times they have underlying yeast, Lyme, mold, all the things that maybe the mom had that led to the autoimmunity. Now the baby has because he's in the same environment and situation. And so is it that IVF led to autism, or is it that, mold, Lyme, blah, 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 XYZ led to autoimmunity that then led to a baby that now has autism? You know what I mean? Like, we just have to ask
Yes,
bigger
it's
questions.
yeah, it's so it and it feels like I mean, I guess there's no way that to actually really tease that out, but
Hmm.
it feels really obvious that that would be a huge player because these are the things that in natural, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, conception cases, you can't have there's no like factor to bring in about the way that the baby was created. It's just like whatever, sperm meets egg during sex. But all of these things are still true for those
Hmm.
populations. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't change. It's not like, it's not less. It's like if you still did conceive, I mean, yeah, maybe there was like that bump up in your health in some way because it didn't affect you in your reproductive organs, at least. Oh, yeah,
I know.
there's
So much
infinite
to the
amounts of
part.
factors.
I know. And this is why, everyone puts double blind, placebo controlled trials on such a pedestal in the conventional medical world. And I understand there's a time and a place for that. If you're trying to like see if a pharmaceutical does something, we have to know. And if they take a sham pill, does it do the same? And all of these things. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about infertility, autoimmune conditions, chronic conditions, you just can't double blind placebo control trial your way to the answers. You just can't. There's just so many variables that you cannot control for. And there are variables that you don't even understand. A lot of researchers probably don't even really understand the role of epigenetics. And so even when they plan studies, they're not even taking these things into consideration because that's not what's a part of their training. And so they think they've come to this conclusion and they're missing an entire thing that they're blind to. And there's things we're blind to. There's so much complexity. And so this is where you kind of have to zoom out and look at patterns and then also just think, but that's kind of lost in like the scientific world a lot of times because they get so minuscule into these like very specific studies. And that's why review studies are helpful and all of that. But there's just, you guys, if you don't know what it's like to fund a study, when people are like, well, the science doesn't say so, it's like people do not just willy-nilly do studies just for the sake of it. It is so expensive to do a study and do it well. It takes so much thought and effort. I remember when Needed, the supplement company that we love, wanted to do a study to understand if women are actually getting the proper nutrients that they need. I mean, I remember being in the meetings on that and just the effort and the intention and the cost and all of it. It's so much that people are not going to do studies to just see if something is the case if there's no money to be made or if there's no, something behind it. And so we don't
Motive.
have,
There has to be a motive.
yeah, there
Yeah.
has to be a motive. And it's unfortunate that science is so driven by industry nowadays. It's why pharmaceuticals have so many studies around them, but they're not going to study how does your like loving heart affect your baby? Like who's winning from that? Like we could have incredible information, and there are people, that financially make money in other ways by doing those kind of studies, like what's his face, the guy who teaches all of the health stuff. I send people to
Huberman.
workshops. No,
Oh,
he like was in a car accident and his whole body was broken and he healed himself. And oh my gosh, Joe Dispenza.
oh, oh,
So
I didn't know he was in a car accident. I've missed that
yeah,
whole story.
so Joe Dispenza has an incredible story all about self healing. You can heal yourself, and he has these incredible seminars and workshops, and he's turned them into these incredible studies because he has these groups of people, and he can study meditation, and he can study this real time. He has people do blood work before they go to this conference, and then do it
Oh,
after. And he's just all this amazing stuff. So he can study things that a pharmaceutical wouldn't benefit from. And he's uncovering all of this amazing science in the mindfulness meditation world. But, at the end of the day, he makes money from his conferences. So there's still a financial incentive. It's just not directly related to the outcome of the study. And so that is like a way that we can get this information. But a lot of this stuff, if there isn't some incentive, we're just not going to know it. And so this is where we kind of we can't just rely on, well, if the study says yes or no, or what the science says. Sometimes we just have to think critically and think about what makes sense to us. And so with heart defects, this was the other thing I was going to talk
wait,
about.
really quick before you start talking about heart defects, I wanted to say this is one of my hopes with AI is
Hmm.
that maybe somehow there will get to be such an advanced level of AI that it can replicate, that we can do these unethical studies that everybody wants to do because it
Uh-huh.
would be fascinating. We would learn so much more about humans and the way our bodies work and everything like that if we could actually do some of this stuff. And we did back in the day before we were like better humans, and then we decided not to do them. But how cool if if AI could somehow become so like accurate, but then also have the sort of like free will, kind of like wishy-washy, like the variability, the flux of an actual human life.
Hmm.
And then they could run experiments in these
Hmm.
like really fast, amazing ways too, to say, okay, well, what if you have two pregnant women? One's pregnant with a naturally conceived baby, one's pregnant with an IVF conceived baby. They're in the exact same, they're twins. They were identical twins themselves. And they're in the exact same environments. They're eating the exact same food. They have the exact same job, the exact same relationships, or something like that. But like one of them has a very strong spiritual practice and one of them does not.
Ooh, cool.
And
I
just
love
that, and just study the effects of that. And then change it to one of them, they both are whatever spirituality, but then one of them has like a slightly emotionally abusive relationship and one of them has a very
that.
supportive emotion. Like some of these types of
Oh,
factors
I
with
mean,
stress. How cool
so
would that
cool.
be?
I mean, I feel like we could probably do that now because what AI could pull, because they can pull all the data so fast, is that you could put them side by side and say, okay, the only variable here is spiritual practice. You can pull all the data and the science that we know on spiritual practice and how that impacts epigenetics and blah, blah. I feel like even now, those kind of single focus things could be pulled with the algorithm of AI, which is really cool. I'm sure it's being done to some capacity somewhere, but that is cool. I love that idea.
Yeah, because that would give you like such a good idea of what is actually impactful for people. Because you meet people who are really, really just negative and like everything goes bad for them. It
Mhm.
seems like there's a dark cloud over their heads and like there's like bad luck string after bad luck string, whatever. And then, yeah, now there's this health thing, whatever. And then you meet people who it's like, oh, is that like low vibration? Like quote unquote, is that something that
Mhm.
is that this, that, and the other thing that it does? That's just their mindset? Are they self-sabotaging? Are they pulling that in subconsciously? There's so many different things that could happen. At the end of the day, though, like if that is their net effect and view of the world, how does that affect their health and how would that affect the health of their babies and
Mhm.
blah, blah, blah. Who knows? I don't know. But one other really quick thing is that I saw this OBGYN that I really like. His name is Nathan Riley. And he was talking about how this reproductive, so there's these two doctors, both of them are OBGYNs. One of them is also a reproductive endocrinologist. And she's talking about how one of the IUDs, I think the Mirena, the hormonal one, she's seeing a lot of uterine scarring, like in her
Mhm.
practice. And so she made a reel talking about that. And then the other OBGYN comes and like kind of made a stitch of that reel and was like, there's no evidence to say that there's nothing in the studies to say, blah, 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 blah. You don't need to be worried, la, 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 whatever. And he comes on and he stitches it and he's like, well, hold on. If somebody who places and removes thousands of IUDs and also is like in physically inside of the uteri, whatever, and doing visualization and doing testing and doing reproductive endocrinology on these women is noticing a pattern that is more valuable to me than the like lack of findings from a randomized controlled trial. It's like,
Yes.
no, but she's experiencing this. She's actually seeing it with her eyes. And he was saying the same thing. He's like, if I had some granny midwife who's delivered 3,000 babies, notice a pattern between these two factors or like whatever, some correlation here, I'm going to listen to that. Like that
Yeah.
anecdotal evidence is considered like the weakest, quote unquote, but it's just not though, because
I know.
studies cannot show everything.
Did you know proper hydration and mineral balance are key for hormone health, fertility, and preparing for pregnancy? This is why Dr. Morgan and I love Relight by Redmond's, the real salt people. A USA-made electrolyte powder with unrefined sea salt, over 60 trace minerals, plus bioavailable forms of potassium, calcium, and 2 forms of magnesium, malate and glycinate. These minerals support hormones, hydration, energy, and overall health. The best part is they taste delicious. I'm really picky about how things taste, and so you can rest assured this is Dr. Leah approved. I love lemon lime, but I know Dr. Morgan is a strawberry lemonade gal. Head to redmond.life and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 15% off your order of electrolytes, real sea salt, natural toothpaste, and so much more. Again, head to redmond.life and use code HEALTHYMOTHER to save 15%. Happy hydrating on your womanhood and fertility journey. I know. I used to get in fights all the time in medical school about this concept because
I remember the specific professor that you used to get in the fights with.
I just want
But
to
he was
shake him.
wrong. He was wrong
Is
in a lot of
wrong.
ways.
He is wrong because double-blind placebo-controlled trials and all of this, like, well, what does the literature say? Well, the literature doesn't say it. What is the literature? I'm like,
Open your eyeballs.
okay, this is what I have the problem with people who are like, well, I can't see it, therefore it's not real.
Yeah.
I don't have it in my space, therefore it's false. People think that about things, and that the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. And
Ooh,
I
wait,
didn't come
say it
up with
again.
that. That's a thing that people
Say it
say.
again.
The absence of evidence. So let's say there's no evidence in the science about these scarring uteruses. The absence of evidence is not the evidence. It is not the proof that there is absence, right?
Boom. That's
The
great. Let's
absence
make
of
a shirt.
evidence. Yeah. Healthy as a mother. Our 7-paragraph tagline. We are the truth of the nuance of the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence.
Becoming and being a mother.
On becoming and being a mother, put it on a glass bottle and on your t-shirt. It's gonna be great.
It's like Dr. Bronner's. How Dr. Bronner's is like completely filled with the text. It's like scriptures and stuff. It's like you start to read it one day and you're like, what is this all about? It just goes on and on and on. That's like our tagline.
Oh my God, I love it. That's it. It's basically our Healthy as a Mother scripture written on the bottle. It's perfect. We're gonna sell them and it'll be great. And then we can fund research from all of these merch that we'll sell. So yeah, I just think that critical thinking is also important. I feel the same way about the placebo effect when people are like, well, placebo did just as good or better. And I'm just like, okay, that's incredible. The power of the mind. Why are we not studying that? Why do we see placebo as such this negative thing? And I don't know. It's just like we should actually have a whole episode on studies and what they mean and why they're not always the best and all the shaming and all the things. So anyways, at the end of the day, we're obviously trying to get to the truth. And I understand the limitations of being in your own silos, but also, like you said, patterns are important to look at. So with the studies, and the other thing that people need to remember is when people say the studies say, a lot of times those studies are done very poorly and they're looking at limited sample size or they were done a long time ago. Like the Framingham study, for example, if anyone knows anything about nutrition, was a huge pivotal changer in how we looked at nutrition. It changed a bunch of things about fats, don't eat fats, don't have saturated fat, don't eat animal proteins, all of these things. The nurses study was another multifactorial one. And so there'll be these pivotal studies that change everything moving forward. And then it takes so many years before they're like, oh, actually, that was wrong. And we put so much emphasis on like this study said, or this group of studies said, when there's not enough scrutiny of that thing. So it can go both ways, both saying positive and negative things in the natural or conventional world. We just have to, in my opinion, we have to look at research with a blurry vision and not with hard focused vision of like, I see this thing and it's like, that's it. Versus like, I see this thing and I'm just gonna kind of look at it. I'm gonna see that it's there and I kind of also don't see it,
Yeah.
my vision. So there's some, I see that there's a thing there, but also I'm going to hold some potential for some other things and not just like hard and fast. So with that being said, heart defects, there is, some slight increased risk in congenital, meaning born with heart defects in babies with IVF, but most babies do not. However, because of that small increased risk, a lot of women who go through IVF are monitored a lot closer during their pregnancy, which means there's a lot more ultrasounds, there's a lot more anatomy scans, there's all of these things, which we'll get into with pregnancy considerations. And then just one more thing on allergies and eczema. Again, we've already touched on this, but for kiddos that have more allergies and eczemas being born via IVF, I think personally a lot of that comes down probably to the microbiome and the exposure to certain things. We just know the more antibiotics, regardless of IVF, the more risk of a child having allergies, eczema, asthma. We call that the allergic triad. They often go together. And a lot of that comes down to the microbiome. The whole hygiene hypothesis is that in the 80s and 90s, there was this obsession with us trying to have everything be germ-free. And we're like, we need to wash our hands and sanitize everything and don't go around the animals and keep the kids clean and all of this stuff. And what we learned from that sad experiment is that the body freaks out when it doesn't have good bacteria. And when we hyper clean everything, we have hyper hygiene, we create more of these allergic eczema allergy pictures. The best thing you could do for your baby, the best thing you could do pregnant is to go to a farm and just like touch all the animals. And the best thing you could do with your tiny baby is to take them to a farm, take them out into the grass, take them to hay, take them
And have pets, have dogs and cats in your
pets.
house.
Yes, and the data is very clear now that being exposed to even just one household pet decreases your risk of eczema, allergies, and asthma significantly. And being raised on farms and all of this stuff is one of the best things. And there's tons of bacteria. I'm not saying go get norovirus on a cruise ship. Like that's different. There are some bad germs. I'm not saying like go expose your
Worst nightmare. Can you imagine?
Like I would not fly with my tiny baby.
No,
and I would not
you
go
still
to
have
a
to be
foreign
careful.
country. But it's
Yes.
exposing them to the healthy germs, right? Of just like animals and different things and all of that. And so I personally, if I had to guess based on all of the evidence in my AI mind, the risk of that is probably because there's so many antibiotics used along the IVF process and or the people who are going through that again might have some microbiome issues to begin with. So that's that. Okay, some pregnancy considerations. A lot of women going through IVF, they're just very medically managed from the beginning. Their doctor's very intimately connected into their care versus someone who conceived naturally and might not be at the doctor's office until 12 weeks. If you conceive via IVF, they're like, okay, we like have all these interventions. But we do see that they recommend the detailed anatomy scan more because there could be issues. There are some cord insertion issues with IVF, like I mentioned, some placental issues. And so there can just be a lot more monitoring. There can be some growth restriction issues. But again, we have whole episodes on this. What causes premature birth? What causes intrauterine growth restriction? A lot of times it comes down to health, not always just because of IVF. So almost all of these could have that devil's advocate conversation of what is actually causing it, Okay. Did you want to say
No, go ahead. No, I want to talk during the birth part of it.
Perfect.
Because
Yeah, we're going to get right there. So I had asked this question on my Instagram before we recorded this episode of what questions people wanted to know. And one of them was about baby aspirin. a lot of people going through IVF are told they should just be on baby aspirin, and people are like, is that true? And so, no, I mean, baby aspirin is typically recommended for women who have clotting risk or have a risk of preeclampsia. So typically, no, most women should not be just put on aspirin, but we do see that a lot. And again, it's because there might be more advanced age or autoimmunity or more hypertension or previous loss or some of these factors that led the person to do IVF in the first place. But as a blanket statement, you don't need IVF or baby aspirin just because you're doing IVF.
Yeah, and it's probably mostly age related is my guess because if you're 22 doing IVF for some reason, they're not going to say anything to you about baby aspirin. I would be shocked. But
Yeah.
if you're 38, 40, 42, something like that, they're going to be talking to you about that no matter how you conceived because the preeclampsia risk, but also like,
Mhm.
looking at other risk factors and then, yeah, if you're having multiples, different stuff like that, it's totally one of those things that a perfect example. Is it because of IVF? No, it's because of the factors
Yeah.
that led you there that are real risk factors for other things that are just
Mhm.
concomitant other things.
Totally, totally. And again, I've seen this just with working with enough patients who work with IVF clinics. Not that it's necessarily their fault. Everyone's trying to do the best that they can. The system is broken. That's like the hill I will die on, you know. It's not the doctor's fault necessarily, but there is more of a culture of intervention. You
Hmm.
know, they're already in a specialty of intervention. And so there can be a lot of kitchen sink approaches that I've seen where they just throw every medication at a woman
Yeah.
because they're like, oh, we're already intervening. Let's like, you know, I'm going to give you a steroid. I'm going to give you baby aspirin. I'm going to give you this crazy blood thinner. I'm going to give you this antibiotic. I'm also going to put you on this injection, a lipid injection, blah, blah, blah. Let's just do the whole thing. And I personally don't agree with that approach. And that could also result in some maybe poor outcomes in these babies where, you know, they have been given this whole series of crazy interventions that might impact epigenetically or in the body some way. So there is a way to go through IVF intentionally, only choosing the medications that are absolutely necessary, that are more applicable to you to optimize your health and do all of that stuff. But that is a thing I see in the culture of IVF.
And it's going to be even harder unless you're a very educated or advocate type person to say no to those situations because it's going to feel like, again, sort of like my analogy of talking to the cops. When
Hmm.
you're talking to doctors, sometimes in any doctor, but in a conventional world, and they're like, no, yeah, you just take this. It's like during my bee anaphylaxis moment, and I was in the ambulance and I started to feel nauseous and I thought I was maybe going to throw up and they handed me a bag, which I was like, cool. I would not like to throw up on my lap, you know?
Hmm.
I wasn't even that nauseous. I just like felt a wave of it. I was like, ooh, ooh, okay. But I did say it once and then they they put a little pill in a paper cup and they said, here, just put this under your tongue. Just here, just do it. And I was like, I'm like literally sitting down on the gurney. I'm like starting to get, so I just dumped there, like, it's going to melt under your tongue. Okay, da da da, whatever. And I should have thought to ask what it is. And do I need that? I mean, for what? They didn't say this is for your nausea. They just said, here, take this. And
Yeah,
so I was kind of assuming it was like for the fact that I was having an anaphylactic reaction and I didn't want to die. No, it was Zofran
of course.
because of my mild one comment about nausea. I'm just like, I would have really enjoyed not taking a
Yeah,
Zofran
'cause
right then in that moment.
girlfriend.
I did not need that. And Zofran does have implications in pregnancy. It is not benign. And what? Like,
Yeah,
I don't
I
know.
know.
I was
I know. I
pissed.
know. Trust me. It's a whole thing. Anyways, okay, so let's get to
Anyway,
labor and birth
okay.
because there are a lot of people who go through IVF that end up having a C-section.
Yeah.
And again, these are these deeper questions that we have to ask. When you say, oh, IVF results in more C-sections, is it actually that IVF has higher risk of birth? But we do see more inductions, and inductions often lead to more C-sections. And why are they being induced? Again, it could be a combination of maybe there truly is an issue, or they had a health issue going into IVF that then results in a more high risk pregnancy, or maybe there's just so much intervention, or they're with a provider who is very, you know, big on, you know, intervention, or they're like, we've worked so hard for this baby, you know, I don't want anything to go wrong. Let's just get her out as soon as possible, or whatever. Like, there's so many
Right.
things that can lead to that. There can be higher anxiety. Providers are more cautious. They don't want to like lose the baby. And so again, C-sections can just be a side effect, and I'm not a good person to like look at that because I didn't have a complicated pregnancy other than the fact that I had really bad nausea and vomiting. Everything else was fine, but my babies did end up in C-sections. I didn't induce, obviously, they just never came. And I have wondered that. I just was like, did IVF have anything to do with that, or is it completely separate? It's hard to say.
Well, and it's in my world within like, physiological birth people, it feels like there is definitely less successful IVF home birth kind of situations, but maybe it's also just because of not successful. Maybe it's less people in general who've chosen to go IVF than would go to choose something like home birth. It's sort of, yeah, like the culture, as you said,
Mm-hmm.
because the stats do show that a woman who's conceived via IVF has a sort of a 1 in 2 chance of having a cesarean. There's like that 48% of them, or somewhere between 40 and 60% of them are induced. And it's like, because of all the things you said, because there is a very slight increased risk of stillbirth. They're usually older, which then has its own increased risk, independent factor from the fact that they did IVF. Then there is just this, like, if you're being medically managed by somebody like that the entire time because of the ARRIVE trial, speaking of trials that screwed everything up, that
Yeah.
the data was not interpreted properly. And some people are still making their obstetrical decision making off of that one trial, which was not
Mm-hmm.
well done. They're inducing at like 39 weeks. And so when you're going to induce somebody at 39 weeks and their body isn't ready to go into labor, all of the cascade of interventions. But it is just interesting because it's like, okay, even if we just look at how many women with IVF have then a cesarean, just the repercussions of the cesarean
Yeah.
can account for some of these eczema, allergies, things, whatever, in the
Totally.
kid. It's
Again,
not because of the
more
IVF.
antibiotics, more
Yes,
intervention, all the things that it's so hard to tease it out.
it is.
Maybe
It really is
maybe
so.
AI can. I mean, but this is the thing. Nobody has contacted me to ask anything about my life. I am not in any study.
Yeah, you
So
should be.
think about all the women who are also not in any study. Who are the women? Like, imagine if in a perfect environment, which I totally understand having your own privacy and not having your stuff in the system, but let's just say anonymously, if we actually had the data on all of the women in all the different situations and then could algorithmically capture that data and tease it apart, how cool would that be to know these kind of things? Because I am surely not being accounted for in that study. I didn't have a preterm baby. I don't have a kid with eczema or allergies. Like, I'm not
Right.
contributing to
Because
this data at all.
because you weren't a patient of that one hospital at the time that
Right.
they decided to collect data. And so it's like,
Yes.
there's so many things. It's like, yeah, why not look into other populations of out of hospital births and people with IVF? Maybe those studies exist. I really highly doubt it.
Hmm.
But potentially, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, sample size can really impact it. And where you are you in the South? Are you in Oregon? Like the demographics are different. There's just like different things. So, anyways, post birth, there again are some risks that we've mentioned: more premature babies, lower birth weight, NICU stays, congenital anomalies, but they're very small. And a lot of these probably could be attributed to things that we've already talked about. And at the end of the day, an IVF baby is no different. I think there are some people, I've been in this world for so long and I have now children who with IVF, but it can feel really scary I remember when I met an adult in his 30s, one of my patients actually, he was an IVF baby. So he was one of the first, his mom had PCOS way back in the late 70s or early 80s. And he came to me and I was like fascinated. I felt like he was an alien. I was like, tell me, are you okay? Like, tell me about your life. What has happened? Like, what, I was just like, who are you? This magical, mysterious, like unicorn person that I finally met, someone who'd been through IVF. This was early in my practice. And granted, he did have some health stuff, but I think it was not necessarily attributed to IVF, but who knows? It's like, we don't know. How do we tease it out? But I do remember thinking like, whoa, you seem so different. And it's like, they're not my children. I, it kind of confuses me sometimes that they were born this way, that they were in a freezer, you guys. Like,
You know,
what?
it is amazing
Crazy.
that we can do that. Like, honestly, we have come so far.
I
It
know.
is crazy.
It is crazy. And so I just want to leave with hope that if there's one thing again that you get from this podcast, it's that I I think IVF is a blessing in so many ways. I think there are a lot of people who would not be able to conceive. I think our infertility rates are declining at such a rate that we are going to have a massive population decline. And also, it is a biological right, in my opinion, to be able to have a family if you want one. And that's just taken away from a lot of people for various reasons, which I'll write a book on one day. And, we do need this tool, just like people say, well, how do you intervene? The level of intervention with health is a hard conversation to have, because let's say your dad has a heart attack and you have something that you could give them right now. There's a medication that you can give someone in an acute heart attack that could potentially save their life. Do you not give it to them? Because that was God's will. He was supposed to die on my floor, If your child is having an asthma attack, do you not give them an inhaler? Because, well, that was just, if he was meant to die, he was meant to die. Like, we don't do that. We say, we invented an inhaler, and now this little baby or this boy who has this asthma attack is going to have this tool that we have invented to save his life. And he goes on and has a family, all of these things. And so IVF can be thought of the same way. Are we intervening? Are we playing God? You could play God every time in medicine, because that child with asthma could, was that God's will? I don't know. But why does he have asthma in the first place? He maybe wouldn't if he wasn't born into a city that was full of toxins that we created in the first place. That wasn't God's will. It's like there's all of these like complicated things that are interwoven now. And so because of the world we are in currently, as fortunate or unfortunate as it is, we do need this tool, in my opinion, for certain people. Does everybody need IVF who's struggling with infertility? No, I actually think it's inappropriate a lot of the time. And whether they need better support, right, to be as healthy as possible so that they could hopefully conceive on their own. But if they have to go through this route, like my husband and I did, I still think we need to focus on health as much as possible and not just throw that out the window, which is what's done in most clinics, and really optimize the health of the woman and the man before their egg quality, their sperm quality, their sleep, their stress, their microbiome, their nutrition, all of the things. Because I think if we had that part in our culture around fertility and IVF, I actually think the outcomes for our children would actually be better. Yes. And that how do we still use this beautiful tool when it's needed and appropriate, but in a way that isn't just like
bypassing
intentionality,
Yeah.
So I think you can have the best of both worlds if done intentionally. And yeah, that's all
I love that. I think that was really great. That was beautiful. It's true. It's never going away. It is something that we need. You're right. Like so am I just not going to clip my baby's tongue or laser them off in the beginning of their life because, oh, well, they're just not meant to breastfeed. So, okay. So then what? Like, do I just not give them formula either? And I just let them die because they can't nurse?
Because both of those are tools. Exactly.
Like everybody has such every human, whether you want to believe it about yourself or not, and the faster that you can come to understanding that this is true about you, the more like humble and genuine and vulnerable and cool you'll seem. So the motive is there for you to do this, to recognize your own boundaries and limits and why you think certain things, because some people do think that IVF is wrong. They think, like you said, they think it's wrong. They think it's playing God, whatever. And yeah, how do they delineate that? Well, they're like, well, you're making a baby that shouldn't exist or something. And it's like, okay, well, you're keeping a baby alive that shouldn't be alive now because they had an asthma attack. Yeah. And what's the difference there? I don't see it, or you're doing this and that and the other thing, whatever it is. Like those to me, those types of philosophical conversations are where people really butt up against an edge of themselves that they don't like to acknowledge. And they want to just sit in camps and be like really hardcore and dogmatic. And those people are really scary to me. Like I move further and further away from anyone with that kind of mindset as I get older and just see more of the world. Because I'm like, you're just, oh, sweet. I just kind of want to pet him on the head and be like, oh, sweetie, you just haven't had enough experience yet.
Yeah, exactly.
That, like,
to me, polarizing dogmatic mentalities just highlight that you haven't had enough life experiences with others, wisdom gained. Because if you live long enough and you have enough exposure, you will always end up in the middle in the nuance.
with an open mind. You do have to have an open mind for sure.
Yeah.
But people who are closed-minded, it's like, that's no fun to be around. So I don't know if you're listening to this and you feel like you identify as closed-minded, you
Then
should.
you will not be our friend. So listen to this and move on.
You cannot sit at my table, Jessica. You need to go sit somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's just like, come on, what a boring mindset. Like, don't take things too seriously. And can't you imagine you're like being in a different scenario and situation and wanting something different? Or, everybody's going to have their edges, of course, and that's okay. But you should be able to recognize in yourself that for some reason this makes total sense to you and then that doesn't. Like for me, I can recognize myself that I will go to the ends of the earth to breastfeed my baby, but like co-sleeping doesn't really work. So then I just do the next easiest thing. I don't try that hard, even though I do think it's right. I think it's right and I think it's superior, but it's just not as easy and it doesn't work. And then the really easy thing is to just put them in a little bassinet, not right next to my body, but it's like still close to my face, I guess. And that to me is good enough. And there will be some people who are like, they make that decision about something like formula or whatever, which I personally would not, because I believe so very much in breastfeeding and breast milk. But like, that's me and that's my edge. And I know that doesn't really make logical sense, but I know that about myself. And this is what I implore everybody else to do for themselves, is like, know where you are with this. And also just try to recognize that you don't have to change yourself, but it helps in being a good human.
Totally. I agree. That's such good wisdom on this Healthy as a Mother school of hard knocks or whatever. It's like,
the school of nuance and truth.
it will be added to our tagline. Also the school of all the lessons of motherhood and all the things. But I think this is, we don't mean to like say it lightly. I obviously have been through IVF. I feel like I can speak to this on some level. And if your edge is to not have ever do IVF, I have patients like that too, where they're like, we're going to try everything, but if it doesn't happen naturally, it's just not going to happen. We don't want to go down that route. And that's totally fine too. This does not have to be an option for you. And I have my own personal thoughts and feelings on the use of IVF for maybe not the best intentions. And, that's sort of my line of like, building an army, of superior warriors via IVF. Like that's my edge where I'm like, I think culturally that's inappropriate.
Wait, are people doing that? What are you talking about?
Other countries, yeah, for sure.
Wait, what? Okay, you'll have to tell me about that later. I don't know anything about that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
anyways,
the tech of fertility in certain hands can be really scary. Ew. But we're not going to go down that route right now. But yeah, there's just, my children are amazing angels. They're miracles. I do not think at all what I did personally is evil or anything like that. But everyone has their own opinion. So this is what we talk about today in IVF. And at the end of the day, just love your children. If you don't have them yet, I'm praying for you on your journey, whatever that looks like. And here's to another Healthy as a Mother conversation.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
In order for others to hear this information, please leave a review with Apple Podcasts, subscribe, and share with a friend who would benefit from this content. Please remember that the views and ideas from this podcast are for informational purposes only and are not intended to be a substitute for medical care of any kind, including the diagnosis and treatment of any disease. Consult with your provider before integrating any of this information into your own healthcare plan. A healthier future starts now, and it starts with you.